But the response and the recovery effort is something that's a subject of daily discussions. And so I'm looking forward to talking with you about that today. But of course, this could be a different scenario next week. And that is the challenge that we're all really living with here. So let's start by taking a look at what the Marin economy really looks like. And I know this is a little bit difficult to see, but this is a snapshot of the revenue contribution of the various sectors that we have here in Marin County. And as you can see from this pie chart, we are fortunately a very diversified economy. But what you'll look at, those sectors that I've highlighted in yellow there are the ones that have basically had to stop activities as a result of the shelter in place. And if you aggregate all that sector together, you're approaching 50% of all economic activity in Marin County has had to cease. And some of those sectors remain closed. Fortunately, on the real estate side, that's something that did open up and has resumed, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. But for many of these other sectors, they're on pause. And the business owners and employees of those sectors have a very uncertain outlook as to when they'll get back, if they ever do get back to their other activity. But it's important to understand, because every region is different. Here in Marin County, let's just say almost 50% of our economic activity has been suspended as a result of the shelter in place, and some of this remains closed. From an employment perspective, if you look at the column on the left under employees, you can see which sectors have the largest representation of employment here in Marin County. And once again, those are sectors that are still closed or in jeopardy of closing again. And if you look at things like restaurants, retail, construction, real estate, hotels and motels, once again, schools, once again, you're talking about the largest sectors of employment in Marin being at the most risk for job loss or suspended activity that's going to continue people from working. So despite that very diverse sector composition that we have here, unfortunately, the most important sectors in our economy have been those that have been hardest hit in terms of job losses and in terms of suspension of business activities. So that just goes to show you that despite the fact that Marin County is an affluent place, we are hard hit by this virus. Here are some of the data that is where we are from June till sort of today. And understanding that data lags, this doesn't necessarily represent the situation today. But one of the major and scariest things is this top line here about unemployment insurance claims. So unemployment insurance claims actually represent those individuals who have lost their jobs and who have made a claim for unemployment assistance. There are others out there who have lost their jobs and continue to be hopeful that they'll find another job and haven't quite taken that step to file a claim. So right now what you're seeing is from March, April, and May, the aggregate number is closer to 25,000. Now, just to put that into context, in a normal month in Marin County, you would see an average between 500 to 600 claims per month. So let's say for the same period last year, you may have seen about 1,200 to 1,500 claims. This year, you've seen that number go over 20,000 residents. Most of that loss has been in the employment. Most of that has been in the leisure and hospitality and the retail sectors. Again, leisure and hospitality includes hotels, Airbnb, restaurants, retail, of course. And so as you can see in leisure and hospitality, the tourism sector, let's say, compared to last year, almost half the people working in that industry have lost their job just from March through May. And in the retail sector, it's 16%, and it's almost certainly higher than that today. So these numbers, as I mentioned, are dated. Early on in this, we were working with the county and we were asked to try to take a sort of quick and dirty estimate of the economic impact. And what we found by looking at these various sectors and taking certain weighted averages of potential slowdown in economic activity, that in general, the gross regional product, that is to say the value of all goods and services traded in Marin County, would probably decrease by a minimum of 10%, which would mean an overall revenue decrease by over $2.2 billion. And so the the real impact of that is the tax revenues that are not collected by the county and other jurisdictions. And so as you may have seen in the county budget, they estimated at least a $10.5 million decrease in sales tax revenues just for this year. It's likely to be even bigger than that next year. And that's mainly concentrated in losses in sales tax revenue, the TOT, which is the transit occupancy tax for hotels, and then other taxes like get the share that the county gets for gas taxes, et cetera, et cetera. This, of course, does not include property taxes, which oddly enough are estimated to go up because the values of property, again, oddly, unlike the last recession, are actually expected to continue to increase. So that 10.5 million is mitigated somewhat by an estimated increase in property tax revenues that the county will collect. And for those of you that don't already know this, property tax revenues from the tax revenue perspective are the largest share of revenue that the county collects. But the impact of all of this has been that every jurisdiction and every school district have had to put cuts in place. And all of them vary, but let's say a town like Corte Madera is more adversely affected than a town like Larkspur may be, just because the sales tax revenue plays such a significant role in their budget that they are more acutely affected by this. And then as we all know, although there's no data to really track businesses that close, we know from just walking down our streets in our downtowns that those businesses have closed, many of them permanently. And unfortunately, the last couple of weeks, what we've really seen is that those businesses that were able to last to manage the initial wave of closures through federal assistance like the PPP loans or even some of the grants that the cities and towns have put together here, they're now facing difficulty because we haven't been able to fully reopen. And even then, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, the demand side of this, that is consumer spending, has not necessarily come back to a level that would allow them to stay in business despite the fact that they're reopening. So this is just what's happened the last 3 months. And just a couple of weeks ago, I might have said, this is pretty sad news, but things seem to be on the upswing. But as we've all seen, there's been a bit of a resurgence in cases. The state, like other states, has had to pull back from some of the reopenings. And so we still don't know where this is going to go going forward, but this is what we've observed the last 3 months. There has been some cases of resiliency, as I like to call it, meaning that our economy is able to manage some cases of this overall economic shock. As most of you are probably aware, the home prices have, now that the real estate sector has reopened, home prices are at the same level that they were as last year. So with the exception of the fact that the number of transactions were delayed in what is usually the very busy spring buying season, prices have not been affected. And in fact, there's even some discussion that they may continue to increase because of demand. So one of the reasons that prices have remained the same as last year as of today is that there was that pent-up demand from the spring buying season that was put on hold. But in addition to that, most of you have heard anecdotally about this rush from the cities to the suburbs. And indeed, if you talk to real estate agents, you'll find that a lot of their client base that is buying right now are those that have accelerated their move from San Francisco or other urban areas to the suburbs like Marin County. And of course, as we all know, Marin County is a highly desirable destination. So all points sign to that market remaining very strong despite what's happening around us in the economy at the global level. Now, the big question is, will that continue if the economic outlook continues to worsen and other segments of the workforce, including the high-wage workers, many of which we have here in Marin and San Francisco that would normally be buying homes, if they start to lose their jobs or slow their spending or put those home purchases on the back burner, we may see some movement there. One of the real talking points has been this dichotomy of economies where you've got this very negative picture nationally with unemployment and business closures However, the stock market seems to be doing very well. I mean, between even yesterday and today, it's gone up considerably. Now, that could always change, but there's two interesting things about that from our perspective. Number one is a lot of Marin residents have assets in the market, including their savings. And so it's a very positive thing that the market has regained pretty much everything that it lost. I mean, at one point in time in March, the market was down 42%. It's basically recovered all of that. So for those Marin residents that have savings and equities, at least that has somewhat stabilized. Again, it could be a different picture next week. Some of the individual companies, as I'll talk about later, have been doing well. Those are employers of our residents. So many of our residents that work in the tech sector, financial services, some of these other sectors are actually doing pretty well in the markets. So that's a good sign for employment of our residents. And then the most important thing is, of course, the markets are forward-looking. And so if investors are having confidence that we're eventually going to turn the corner and we're eventually going to do this, that's a better indicator than most of us that are looking at sort of the day-to-day data and what's happening around us. The federal government did move rather swiftly to provide liquidity for companies, small businesses especially. And as we know, thousands of companies in Marin County were able to access those loans, which has basically allowed them to remain open. As I said earlier, we don't know how long that's going to last, but at least those companies would have likely failed without that support. They were able to access that. The banks that we have here that offered that product did a great job in making sure that it was easy to access. And that's really been a success story. And then, of course, we all have seen certain businesses like bike shops and grocery have actually been flourishing through this because of demand. And some sectors like biotech and others, particularly in the tech sector, have actually been flourishing throughout this because of increased demand. Those sectors are present in Marin County. And as I already said, we do have residents that are employed by those sectors. And then, again, looking for those silver linings, many people have discovered what work from home is like. Some companies have shifted, like Twitter, have said you can work from home as long as you like. And we know that there have been a number of positive benefits from that shifting work culture. I myself, before I came into this role, worked from home because the company I worked for was in Washington, D.C. I personally did not like it. And I know that there are some other surveys and studies out there that show people's preference for work from home versus office culture is shifting. In the beginning, a lot of people really liked it. Now people are eager to sort of get back to offices. But the reality is that this is one of the long-term effects we will see, this more remote work. And for many people, it's a positive thing. So that remote work scenario has been accelerated. And that, as I said, for many people has been positive. Of course, the major thing is we just don't know. This is a fluid situation, and what there is uncertainty. And as all of you know, businesses don't like uncertainty. But you really have to unpack it a little bit because it's not just a simple issue of will we get a vaccine and will this all be over? Right now, there are major questions that we're all trying to deal with. And I have to admit that even on a personal level, my own opinion about these issues changes almost on a daily basis. So will we get control of the virus? It seemed like we're working on that direction of slowing the spread, but obviously that's not the case. Can we stay open? We've already seen a reversal. Right now, at the more macro level, we're talking about things like not having fall sports at universities, which is a huge economic driver, not just for those universities, but if you think about all the multiplier spending effects of what happens when somebody attends a college football game, to take that revenue stream away from all of those beneficiaries of that has huge impact. What I like to ask is, will there be a resumption in consumption? And I'll talk a little bit about this, but just because we reopen things doesn't mean people, consumers specifically, are going to be ready to go back and buy things the way they did before, especially if it involves any sort of human contact, which a lot of businesses in Marin County, like salons and yoga studios and restaurants, they involve that. So we've already seen, I mean, I live in San Anselmo. I went down there this weekend. San Anselmo, the town, has made a great effort to try to encourage people to come downtown and shop and dine. And I have to admit, I was saddened to see this weekend that it was empty. And they've spent money, as have the businesses, to try to accommodate that, and the people still aren't coming. And then finally, what will the future workplace look like? Companies that have employees are struggling with what they should do with their physical facilities. And even then, you know, there are doomsday scenarios like a 50-floor office building that has 3 elevators. If you can only have one person in an elevator at a time, I mean, what is going to happen? I'm not from the commercial real estate sector, but I've talked to several people that are in it, and all of you are involved in it. I don't think there's as much doom and gloom from professionals in that industry as those that aren't in the industry. I mean, there are still transactions occurring. It's not the most sunny outlook, but it's not as bad as people seem to paint it out. But there certainly will be opportunities to reimagine what the workplace looks like, what the office setting looks like. And that is already happening right now. If you're really interested in that, Gensler, which is an international design and architecture firm, has been putting out some very, very interesting studies on what the offices could and should look like. But anyway, this is the uncertainty that we're dealing with on a daily basis. And as from an economic perspective, this is very difficult. These are big questions to try to manage and make decisions on. So from the very beginning, the biggest concern I had here was this issue of demand. And now with a few months experience of reopening, we're finally starting to see some evidence of consumer sentiment, but also consumer behavior. And so we're starting to see a number of different studies out there that are trying to get a handle on what consumption is going to look like going forward. So one of the most important studies I've seen so far was done by McKinsey, which is a strategy consulting firm, and they did a global survey of consumers on what are the factors that you would need to see in place in order for you to feel comfortable going out, sort of resuming your day-to-day sort of consumption patterns. And these on the left here, consumer sentiment milestones, are listed in order of importance. So most of us would have thought, well, everybody's waiting for a vaccine. And once that occurs, then we'll feel safe to go out there. But that's actually not the issue. The number one issue that came up is when the authorities say, okay, it's now safe to go out and do that, that seemed to be the prevailing indicator when people would feel comfortable getting back there. That was more important than whether you just open things or whatever safety measures a store might be taking, or if that vaccine or treatment eventually occurs. Now, the reason that I think this is important is because here in Marin County, most of you are probably familiar with Dr. Willis, who is our public health officer and who is the one that is the public-facing decision maker about what reopens and whether our data is looking good or bad. And Dr. Willis is doing a fantastic job in my view, and they are looking at all the right data. But he has yet to come out and say, look, restaurants are open for outdoor dining and we think it's safe. And so from a psychological perspective, something like that may be very helpful in getting people back out there if you believe this study that McKinsey did. The other more important thing now is looking at actual behavior. So what consumption trends are actually showing and predicting consumer behavior? And there's a lot of studies out there on this. I personally think the best studies to follow are the ones from the financial institutions like JP Morgan Chase that has this database of debit cards and credit cards where they can track where the spending is occurring. And JP Morgan Chase came out with something really interesting last week, which was a review of spending by 30,000 debit or credit card holders that showed geographically where there was an uptick in restaurant spending correlated to where the geographies that saw a rise in cases. Converse to that, debit card and credit card spending at grocery stores from a geographic level was correlated with where the case numbers have actually declined. So what that means is that the more people are going out to restaurants, the more cases seem to be increasing, whereas those that are increasing their spending at the grocery store, maybe as opposed to going out to restaurants, are in the geographies where cases are actually declining. Now, that's kind of a big leap to try to draw a conclusion from that, but it's very interesting data. And that's the type of data that we need to have right now to really kind of understand what consumers are doing. Another very important one, which I highlight here, is something that we refer to as the digital shift. And that is what kind of consumption activities have shifted online. And so this organization payments.com, again, looking at 12,000 data points, asks the question, how much of your consumption has shifted online? So how much of your buying of food or clothing or using the gym, maybe even your work, has shifted online and will remain there permanently? And almost 40% of consumers with incomes of over $100,000, which fits us here in Marin County, said that they have permanently shifted their consumption to online ways. That's very bad news for all of our Main Street retailers here in Marin County, which were already facing severe pressure from the shift to online purchasing. The Bureau of Labor Statistics was tracking online shopping activity and noted that in the first 10 weeks of this pandemic, the amount of commercial activity online basically matched what the previous 10 years of online sales growth. That's an astounding figure. And then they determined that if that was to continue, the opportunity cost to brick and mortar, that is to say people not going into stores to buy the same goods they otherwise would, but instead buying them online, could represent over $150 billion of revenue that those stores would lose. So again, these are all estimates. They're not data that has been actuals. But these figures are scary when you go back and think about that Marin County has a lot of personal services companies like restaurants, like small retailers. You can see that our economy being largely composed of those types of businesses puts us at extreme risk in this case. And as the data that I presented from May to June about Marin County shows, we're already seeing that come to fruition. So that's really the kind of the situation on how the data and what the data is showing as it relates to economic performance these past few months. There are a few bright spots, but by and large, Marin County, like the rest of the world, is looking at a prolonged economic challenge. And this means that we need to be focusing on what recovery is going to look like. So I'm going to transition into what's happening on the recovery front. I will use the occasion to mention that Marin Economic Forum has created what we call the Marin Economic Recovery Data Tool, where we've taken all of these indicators like unemployment, like home prices, and we've aggregated them into one tool that you can find on our website. And at the end of this, maybe I'll try to pull that up so you can see. And again, that data is reported at different frequencies, but basically it's a one-stop shop for all the data at the macro and Marin County level. And hopefully you can use that in some of your information gathering out the road. So let's take a look at the recovery side of this now. Most of you are probably familiar with Marin Recovers. If you're not, that is the county entity, the county initiative that is in charge of reopening the economy. And it's being led at the very top by Dr. Willis, the public health officer, and it's being implemented by county staff in collaboration with a lot of private sector representatives, including MEF and chambers of commerce. And the first thing they did was to create these industry advisory groups that would give input into what is needed to by businesses to safely reopen. And fortunately, Marin County was quite behind the rest of the country in terms of organizing their reopening effort. But what that meant was a lot of industries like the restaurant sector, like gymnasiums, their national level representatives were way ahead of everybody in terms of putting in place their own guidelines. So what Marin Recovers did was basically adopt most of the other existing guidelines for reopening that were there, but with these industry advisory groups that included representatives of the local business community to give certain input, they were able to quickly develop these guidelines. And if you didn't know this already, each business is required, and these are of course consumer facing businesses like a grocery store, a restaurant, etc., are required to do what's called a site protection plan, which is basically a checklist of all the safety measures that these guidelines suggest. That has been the major effort that the county has focused on so far, and that is really dealing with the immediate term issue. The longer term issue has not yet been undertaken, and I'm going to get to that in a second. But what I want to impress upon all of you is that the decision for reopening, there are a couple of different factors. Number one is what the state of California determines is the prevailing guidance. So no matter, even though the counties have some leverage in terms of what they reopen, the state sets the floor. So you can never really go beyond what the state has already mandated. Now, you may have heard about this idea of a variance. A county can seek a variance where in certain cases they don't have to comply with the exact state mandate. This is very difficult to understand, even for me personally that's involved in this. But Marin County does have that variance, so we were able to move to things like outdoor dining before some other counties were, even though the state wasn't necessarily allowing dining. That is not the case with things like hair salons and nail salons. And to be honest with you, the guidance on those particular sectors continues to be inconsistent, even at the state level. When we had to pull back and close hair salons on Monday, there were two conflicting messages on the state websites about whether that had to cease in its entirety or whether you could still give a haircut but outside. And it says two different things at the state level. So this has not been an easy thing for Marin County officials to manage, and certainly not easy for businesses to understand. But that being said, the epidemiology, the health data is the overarching guidance on when things get reopened. And so if you think back to that data that I shared about employment, early on in this, I was raising with the county, the retail sector employs almost 10,000 people. Is there any weight given to the fact that those jobs are at risk by keeping that sector closed? And at the end of the day, that doesn't outweigh the health concerns, which are driven by the data set that the county uses. And that data set, by the way, is available for public viewing on the Health and Human Services website. It's on the Marin Recovers website, which is just www.marinrecovers.com. There's a lot of information there. You, the public, are able to see the same indicators that the officials are looking at, and you're able to see they've actually done a good job in setting up the metrics so that you can see how they measure a project, what their benchmarks are, how they're measuring progress. And so if you ever get sort of confused as to why something closed or when something might reopen, through the Marin Recovers website, you have access to all the data that they're using to make their decisions. But as I started to say, what we have been advocating for some time, and I think we're starting to get there, is we need to start looking at the longer term plan here, because the fallout from this is so significant that we're not going to be able to recover in a way without having some type of strategy to get there. Most regions across the country, including our neighbors in San Francisco and Sonoma County, have actually created these formal task forces to lead the effort. And these are public-private initiatives. They're usually led by a senior public official or elected official. And they do have in their mandate to create a plan of how they're going to get out of this mess, if you will. We're not yet there here with the county, and we need to get there. And like I said, I think we're slowly getting there. But the county has really been, rightfully so, concerned with the public health side of this. But the longer term planning is the thing that the Marin Economic Forum is really concerned about and would like to see get moving. And this planning now is not some economic development organization like us creating a bunch of recommendations on what you need to do. This strategy and planning needs to be done now, not only with community input, because it's our economy that we want to design, but it also needs to be equitable, because as we've seen in the last month, Marin County has not traditionally considered other communities when we're looking at our economy. And I think that that issue has come front and center. I think it's acknowledged. I think the data backs that up. And I do think that now is the time to start engaging other stakeholders in this process, and creating our plan, our strategy for the future is a perfect way to address that. And as I've already suggested and have suggested in other forums, if you look at the composition of our economy and how it functions, it's largely built to serve Marin County residents. And that has positives and negatives. Every community needs to have businesses that provide goods and services. And if we can access them here in Marin versus having to go across a bridge or get on a freeway, all the better. But as you can see, when you have an economic shock like this, if you are highly dependent on your local market for consumption, and that local market for some reason cannot consume, then your businesses are at high risk. And so if you ask me, from certain perspectives, our economy is too dependent on the local market. We don't have enough companies here that serve national or regional markets or global markets. Those types of companies not only have proven to be resilient, largely because of the good or service that they produce, but because they've got a broad market spread, some markets throughout this have been able to remain more active than others, and they've sort of hedged their risk, if you will, by servicing other markets. Those companies like the BioMarins, like the Autodesk, like Restoration Hardware, which are all Fortune 500 companies, by the way, also have some of the better job opportunities for our residents. And as we know, most of our high-skilled residents need to leave the county for job opportunities. In the meantime, this high dependence on personal services companies that we have, because of the wage levels associated with that, we have to actually import that labor. And so there's been this imbalance in our workforce for a long time now of not enough high-skilled, high-wage jobs here, and too many lower wage jobs. And of course, as we all know, the people that have been most affected economically by this are those in the low wage jobs of the companies that had to close. So I'm going to stop there because that's a lot of information, and I'm sure you're eager to ask questions or have a discussion. But I guess my closing point is that this situation is very fluid, that it makes it difficult to predict anything. But a planning process is certainly required. And all of us, I think, have been forced to rethink what our businesses are going to be doing in the future, what kind of business mix we want to have in our local economy, and what are the steps to achieve that, and how do we, continue to try to take steps to mitigate what has been a real, disaster for our economy and for others' economies. So with that, I'm going to stop the share, put back the video, and I'm looking forward to a conversation.
Thank you so much, Mike. That was really informative and great. Actually, I think we can open it up and people can ask their questions and comment. But before we do that, I just want to ask you maybe to briefly tell people a little bit more about how they potentially could get involved with Marin Economic Forum, and also what role is Marin Economic Forum playing in all of this in terms of the future planning and interacting with other public agencies.
Yeah, thank you, Nina. So MEF is a 501c3 public benefit organization. So we're a nonprofit. We, unlike a chamber of commerce, we don't have members. We have financial sponsors, and we have members like Nina that are on our board and provide guidance. Most of our funding comes from private sponsorships, although like everybody else, going forward, that's uncertain. but we also receive a matching grant from the County of Marin. So we have to raise a certain amount of private funding, and the county will match that up to a certain level. But we also do a lot of revenue generating consulting projects. Many of you may be familiar with Dr. Rob Eiler, who serves as our chief economist. Rob and I produce different economic impact studies, or we recently did a major study for the Marin County Visitors Bureau on the tourism sector. And so we are available for consulting projects. That is another part of a revenue stream. Some of you may have attended our annual event called Forecasting the Future. That happens in January of each year. This year was our largest ever. We had over 300 people. It was held at the Marin County Civic Center for the first time, and it was just a really outstanding event. We had the chief economic advisor to the governor, Lenny Mendoza, there. And so that's an annual event. We'll be looking forward to doing that in January. That's something you can certainly participate, or even we have organizations that sponsor that. So if your organizations are interested in that. And that's really how we function. Our role in all of this right now has really been twofold. So as an organization that sees ourselves as the experts on the economy, and as really the wanting to put out objective quality data and analysis, we have been communicating on a weekly and monthly basis with the public, sharing data about the economic impacts and the recovery opportunities, frankly, for this. And we put that out in you can join our newsletter subscription. You can do that by going to the website and joining. And we have a weekly communication that goes out. I have a monthly blog to keep people informed that way. As it relates to the county efforts, so we are part of the steering committee of Marin Recovers. That entity is going to eventually transform ideally into the type of task force that I was mentioning before. And if that happens, MEF will play a very direct role as a subject matter expert, and probably in an advisory capacity. If we can get to a point where the county does commit to producing a strategy, that will need to be a very inclusive effort. And there will be a way at that time to solicit community input, particularly from the business sector, into that. And so some of you may have been involved in our business retention and expansion project that we were running last year, and up until March of this year, we had a number of focus groups, we had a survey. So I would say, stay tuned, because I think as the county looks at how they're going to respond and recover from this, there's going to be a public engagement piece of that. Nina, I can certainly, go to you, and you can disseminate that to your members to make sure that they get involved. Sorry, that's a long answer, but there's a lot of ways to be involved, and there's a very key role that MEF is playing right now.
Yeah, that was a great answer. Thank you. I'm really glad that you clarified all of that, and I think people find that valuable. What about if anybody was interested in joining the board? Would that be something that could be a possibility?
Well, right now, I think we have a bit of a pause. We have a really large board right now, and there's a long story on how we got to that point. But right now, I think we are definitely looking for our normal financial sponsors like we do every year. And again, there's information about that on the website, or you can contact me directly if you have any interest or you think your organization would have interest. I mean, we have all kinds of organizations that sponsor us, from the usual suspects like all of the banks, but we also have some of the cities and chambers that are sponsors for us. And a lot of other private organizations, some like the Spinnaker Restaurant, Nina's group is involved. We have a very diverse group of financial sponsors that all, see the need for some type of entity in the county to be focused on our economy. I should have said earlier, if you didn't already know this, Marin County is the only Bay Area county that does not have a publicly funded economic development agency. And normally in times like this, that agency would be taking the lead. And if you look just up in Sonoma, you can see how much further ahead of us in terms of preparing their planning and actions for reopening they're way ahead of Marin County, and they have the benefit of a publicly funded, they have the Economic Development Board there, which is a public entity. And even well-funded private entities like down in the Silicon Valley, joint venture Silicon Valley, they're way ahead of Marin County in terms of bringing these groups together and getting a plan going. And so we are a little bit behind here, but you know, we're catching up and we're making progress and we're learning from others, frankly.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mike. Great work that you're doing for sure. So Paul, do you want to unmute yourself and actually ask your question yourself since you had two of them?
Thank you. And Mike referenced one of my questions a bit later after I wrote it, which was, after we experience this spring resurgence of home buying, will the demand taper off and will we enter a long-term decline in real estate housing prices?
Yeah, you know, that's difficult to say, obviously. Marin is, as you know, Marin's a hyper-local real estate market, right? And even looking at the data can be dangerous because you can have one sale, you can have a $20 million sale in Belvedere, which will skew the data of, you know, 10 other home sales across the region. And so I think that, you know, a real estate agent would have a much better answer for you. But from what I've seen and heard, I don't expect there to be, even in, if you look at the data from the Great Recession, and if you look at the prices, they actually bottomed out in the year 2009. But the difference between 2009 and 2007, before the recession happened, was not a hugely significant number for Marin County and nowhere near what other regions experienced. So I hesitate to try to predict what would happen there, but history shows us that the Marin housing market is pretty resilient. And if anything, the current attitude of buyers is they still want to get into a market like Marin more so than ever.
Yeah, I've experienced a few different declines in Marin County over the years as a homeowner, and have lived through, going back in the early 90s, you know, a 40% drop in real estate prices. So I'm aware that it can happen, but praying it won't.
Yeah.
Thank you, Paul. Any other questions from you before we move on to John Schuring had a question? John, do you want to ask your question, please?
Answer it? I'm not sure I can. I can ask it. Thanks, Nina. We work with a number of hospitality concepts, and we're finding that those employees whose employment status is questionable are very hesitant to seek unemployment benefits. And I'm wondering if that's factored into those numbers that you put up there, or if there's some adjustment or something that factors that in.
Hi, John. If I understand your question, you're asking some people who in the hospitality sector specifically who have been laid off but have not yet filed a claim for uninsurance, if that's factored into the numbers that I put up on the screen?
Correct. Yep.
Yeah. No, those numbers are not factored in there, because what I showed was what we're tracking actually are the actual claims that are made, because that is a significant step forward from losing your job to actually making a claim for benefits versus perhaps seeking another job. And in the sector you just mentioned, hospitality, that is where the highest number of unemployment insurance claims have come from, because those folks obviously, you know, are from many perspectives at highest risk of economic, you know, collateral damage by losing, you know, a month's worth of wages.
Yeah,
So
I think there was sort of a second part to your question too, John, about employees with questionable immigration status. How does that factor in different industries, Mike? And is that something that's evaluated? Yeah,
so it's important to note that the state decided early on that even undocumented workers would be eligible for unemployment benefits. And I don't know how many other states have done that, but that's certainly unique. And that was to try to ensure that, you know, those people just didn't, you know, go down the drain from an economic perspective. So those benefits are available. We don't have the data that says how many insurance claims have been made by undocumented workers as a result of their ability to do that because of what the state allowed. But that you can assume that there are a large number of people who have been reticent to make a claim for unemployment insurance benefits because of that status, unfortunately.
Yeah, this is John again. We've had firsthand experience that many of those people are hesitant and don't trust that, guidance from the state. And
Okay.
whomever is pushing programs like this, it'd be great if there was some education pushed out to that community that would make them or get them comfortable with making those claims, because they're all really, really struggling.
Yeah, well, I think, John, if I recall, I mean, first of all, the Canal Alliance is very actively addressing that issue. And also here in Marin County, the financial support that is available through the county in partnership with the Marin Community Foundation, that financial support is available regardless of immigration status. In fact, it's very purposely set up to encourage undocumented workers to seek and pursue that funding. And as you may have heard just yesterday, the county and Marin Community Foundation have, agreed to another $250,000 worth of grants that can be given to both individuals and families. And so I think here in Marin County, you've probably seen overall a stronger response to that issue than in other places. That doesn't mean that it's any easier for those folks to deal with the issue, but mechanisms are in place.
Got it. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you, John. And Donatella, I know that you had a question.
Yes, good morning. First of all, Mike, I wanted to thank you for doing this for our group. We really appreciate it. It's also relevant to us, who live in Marin and work for part of it in Marin County. And thank everyone for participating. So I wanted to know, and I know the situation is very fluid and, it's very difficult. No one has a crystal ball at this point, but I'm wondering if this pandemic and, is it creating any opportunity for businesses to come to our county, relocating from other areas that may have been even more depressed, or you see any businesses leaving the county because of the challenges they're having?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. Thank you for raising that. Let me address the second part of your question first. We don't have any, again, evidence of companies that are leaving the county. I don't know if there are companies that will shut down beyond what we've seen with the very, very small businesses, right? I would say that's more likely than anybody leaving as a result of this. But to your first question, I really appreciate you for raising that, because even before this happened, there was some interest in the commercial real estate sector and in other sectors in trying to look at the business attraction issue. First and foremost, Marin County has a lot of attributes for the right kind of company. And we have good examples of companies that have recently located here because of those types of attributes. So there's a life science company that relocated from the South Bay, which is a biotech hub, as you may know. They relocated to San Rafael for two reasons. Number one is they thought that they would have an easier time drawing employees from the East Bay and the North Bay to a location in Marin County relative to all the way down in the South Bay. And because before this pandemic, it was so difficult to find high quality employees, they found that making a move geographically was one way to address that. But also, as a company that cares deeply for their employees, they wanted to make sure that their employees had the opportunity, either at lunchtime or after work or whatever, to enjoy a quality of life, if you will, which is different than what those big biotech office parks offer. And so they were drawn by the very specific attributes that Marin County has. Another company very similar to that was a marine insurance company that was in Oakland for like 30 years. And they found that not only were prices increasing significantly in Oakland, but that Sausalito was highly desirable just aesthetically. It's a place to have your office. I think one of their employees lived in Marin as well. And so they relocated to Sausalito. So there are examples. There's another software company that was in the Presidio, actually. And, you know, one of the founders happened to live in Marin, and that was probably a big influence. But some of his thinking was, and they went to Drake's Landing in Kentfield there, and they were thinking like longer term, some of the work that they had been outsourcing to Taiwan, they actually felt could probably be done by students at College of Marin. And they felt that the Drake's Landing area might be the kind of place with its access to the ferry and Marin Country Mart and all that, that might be the kind of place where you could actually have a tech hub in Marin. So that was a big gamble. I don't really know if that's ever going to come to fruition, but you see people thinking that way. And we, MEF has been advocating for some type of business attraction for a long time, because I believe that if you look at our commercial inventory here, we have a niche. That professional services firm that needs high-skilled workers that will have anywhere from 20 to 50 people in their office, that wants to draw from our high-skilled workforce here, doesn't want to be an expensive rent place like San Francisco, or even the East Bay or South Bay, and that is looking you know, to maybe not have to deal with some of the regular commute patterns. Marin County offers a lot. And then if you're going to want to attract employees to live sort of where they work, because as we all know before this, commuting was one of the major issues. I mean, we have the best weather, we have the best public schools. I mean, the quality of life that people can enjoy here should make a company really think about, you know, locating here for their employees. Not only the people that are already here, but the people that they could maybe attract to come here. So we've already been working with some of the bigger commercial real estate players on about a promotion of Marin County. And then of course, as you all know, one of the biggest phenomena that we're seeing happening is what you call this de-densification. So companies that are in urban centers like San Francisco are absolutely looking at other things where they don't need huge volumes of space, where they maybe do a hub and spoke kind of thing, where they put smaller satellite offices where their employees are living. I mean, this has always been an aspiration for Marin County because of our size. Long before I came into this role, I know that was what people were promoting and pursuing. This may be the time to capitalize on that. But this goes back to the issue I raised about a plan and a strategy. If we're going to do any type of business attraction, it has to be done in a very specific way. And it has to be done with buy-in from the county and from jurisdictions, frankly, that are going to have to look at their regulatory regimes to make sure that they're accommodating for those types of businesses here. One of the biggest challenges, you know better than I, is tenancy improvements. So if we can't update this office stock that we have here, we're not going to draw those people even though they want to be here, right? So all these things, you know, once you get that thing in a plan, then all of a sudden you're getting commitments and interest to sort of drive that business attraction effort that's really never happened before. So that is, again, I'm sorry for the very long response, but you raised an issue that I think is a critical one, critical opportunity in all of this. And MEF is very supportive of that.
That's a great answer, Mike. Thank you. I mean, what is being done to find those businesses and inform them of what's available in Marin?
Yeah, so nothing's being done now. In fact, it's not really been in the scope of MEF previously to do business attraction. As I, you know, there's a very specific methodology and approach to that activity. But, you know, again, I'm advocating for this. If this is something we get in our plan and our strategy, and we start to, you know, realize as a community that we need to attract those companies that will bring higher wage and middle skill jobs to Marin County, and that those companies are probably looking for alternatives at this time, then you can start to, you know, then you overcome that hurdle that this county has always had difficulty in. And I grew up here, so I know this. I think the culture has changed a little bit, and the desire to try to actually bring companies here. And I'm not talking about a 1,000 person company. We're talking about something that companies that fit our preferred characteristics. There are lots of ways to do business attraction, but until we get everybody to commit to wanting to do that, and that includes a commitment of some resources, we can't really embark on that but there are ways to do it. Let's put it that way.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Alex, I believe you might have had a question that you'd like to ask. Alex, I think you need to unmute.
Okay.
Hi.
So, okay. So first, I want to thank you for making time in your schedule to come do this morning. We really appreciate it as a group. And I'm sure everybody on this webinar is getting a lot out of it. I know I am. One of the things you raised was the fact that we don't have a publicly funded economic development agency. Is it time to change that? And is there a move underway to do that? Because it sounds like that's something, we probably should have.
Yeah, thank you for that question. As an economic development professional, absolutely. The fact that we haven't had that, I think, has hurt us in some ways, and very specifically by looking at the sort of company mix that we have here. As I said before, I mean, we've been too dependent on smaller scale personal services companies as what we prioritize as our economy. Now, there's nothing wrong with saying that characteristically we want to have these small Main Street businesses. They're a fabric of our community. They are huge contributors to our social fabric as well. I mean, they're the ones that sponsor our baseball teams and give to schools, and that's not a slight in any sense, but as a result of a lack of business attraction and lack of strategic focus on our economy over the past couple of decades, I think we find ourselves where we do today, where we have too many, well, let's say we don't have enough other types of companies that would be providing jobs and revenues right now, okay? There have been efforts by this organization in the past, unsuccessful efforts, and there's a couple of board members here that on this call that actually can confirm that, to ask the county to do that, or to actually put more investment into Marin Economic Forum to play that role if they weren't ready to make that big leap to an actual agency. That's a big budget, to be honest. But I think now we are seeing more than ever that our economy, it's one of the 3 E's that people talk about, right? But in Marin County, we've never really discussed the 3 E's. So environment, economy, and equity, right? We're not doing so good on the equity piece. We all know that. But the economy piece is front and center now. And so I think you're right to raise the question. Many people have advocated for that in the past. I think going forward, maybe that's something that comes out of this plan, right? Maybe this is the time where people recognize, look, going forward, we're going to need to have a greater county focus on our economy. And the best way to do that is to actually have a county position. I'd put it back to you, actually, or to members of the group. I mean, knowing that we haven't had that, and knowing that we're the quandary that we're in right now, what do people think that would be, given Marin County's history? That plays an important role here too.
Well, I think that we're, we've been a bedroom community for San Francisco for so long, and it's been, that people could always find better paying full-time employment in the city, and then come to Marin. And if you have a lot of small businesses who didn't provide strong employment opportunities. So it's, it depends on how San Francisco responds. It seems to me that if we see a lot of companies like the big tech companies letting their employees work from home, the advantages of being in the city will start to dissipate. And it would seem like the county should then look, well, we can't always rely on San Francisco for our livelihood. We need to look at home.
Yeah, it's a great point.
Okay, thank you, Alex. Paul, I think think you had a last question you would like to ask, and then Mike, I know we are running over, so I don't want to
No, it's fine. I
monopolize your
can have these
time,
discussions
but
all
would it
day.
be okay if Paul asks his last
Yes,
question?
of course. Yeah.
Thank you, Ian. And I've got to go to the meeting too, but I was just playing off of your comments, Mike, and you know, being a resident in Marin County for 30 years and a consumer of office spaces, I was just thinking what a wonderful opportunity that Marin County has to brand ourselves as a healthy office space and talk about not only do we have the natural beauty of the environment and our healthy living reputation, but can we remodel some of these offices? I mean, if you look at some of the office spaces, they're boxy and old and they don't feel like Marin County. But our real estate owners in Marin, I know the shopping centers have done a lot to remodel. Are the real estate office owners kind of in that mood of remodeling and really starting to push that healthy office space and hub and spoke opportunities?
Well, yeah, it's a great point. I mean, those owners, property owners, as you know, have been stymied by the regulatory environment that just has not, has made it very difficult to do those tenancy improvements and made it costly, frankly. You know, you get I don't mean to get into the weeds here, but you get these details where you've got a 30-year-old office building that has 4 parking spots. And now, you know, somebody's going to come along and say, well, you can't remodel the inside of that until you add 6 more parking spaces, which is just not possible. So if there's anything that gives me some optimism, it's that
Bicycle racks out front.
yeah, I'm optimistic that in the face of this pandemic, towns moved very quickly on the permitting front for restaurants to do outdoor business, right? I mean, and that restaurants have it hard. They are really highly regulated. So for the towns to work with the county health department and all that to very quickly allow those organizations to accommodate a totally different form of service by fast tracking permitting or expediting things, obviously you can do it. Again, I point to Sonoma County that in the face of rebuilding after the fires, totally changed their planning department and made it very easy. I mean, they were at the time made it that you could start pouring concrete at 4 a.m., you know, to expedite that process because there was such a backlog of foundations that needed to be built. So it's possible, right? It is possible. My take on it is you got to get it in a plan that people commit to. And then once they can make that commitment, then you start working on what are the tactics and the details of implementation.
Yeah, I think we should do it. I mean, there's a lot of opportunity here. So
Yeah.
we'll all talk it up ourselves. I think that's,
Yeah, that's what needs to happen. And
Yeah.
again,
don't wait for the government. We'll just start it ourselves.
yeah.
Thank you, Mike. Well done.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mike. But I think we'll end here just out of respect for your time and really thank you. It was a great presentation. I recorded it, so I'll make that available to everybody and to you too, Mike.
Great.
But really thank you again, and MEF does great work and so do you. So very
Well,
impressive.
thank you so much for having us. As I said, I love these kinds of conversations, so feel free to reach out to me. Nina has all my details. Yeah, like I said, stay tuned because I think there's a lot more to come to this recovery piece and we need as much input from private sector as possible.
For sure. Thank you. Thank
Okay.
you all. Have a
Thank
great
you.
day. Much
Thank you.
You
appreciated.
guys, keep up the good
Bye.
work.
Thank you.